Yes,
You see Chrome?
perfectly.
Yeah,
Yes.
cool.
Awesome.
It's great.
So yeah, this is the Beetle contest. I'm guessing a few folks in here and on this call right now have also done this. Like I was saying, it's low source lines of code, so it was great for beginner auditors. It was also like Code Hawk's, one of first Code Hawk's official audits, and so I think a lot of people hopped in. This one was actually interesting because you see the doc. There's not really many docs, and I think I have a very unorthodox process. I think a lot of people who have done these audit togethers or who have spoken about their audit process, they're very like, oh, I read the docs and I try to get a high level understanding of the system, right? I'm a little different. I've really skimmed through the doc. Like when I started this one, I was like, okay, lending, borrowing, I understand. They mentioned this paper by Paradigm about the blend protocol. So, I read through this real quick and I was like, okay, I understand. And then I really just clone repo, bring it down onto my device, and just start looking at the code. We'll do Beetle. Can you guys see my terminal? Yeah, for sure. So I would go ahead and just, like I said, just open the code and just really start looking through the code. Obviously, so I actually tweeted about this before. So it's a couple things that you want to do before you start an audit, actually. You want to know what the scope is, because there's a lot of audits where some of the contracts aren't in scope. That doesn't mean that you don't need to understand those contracts, understand the full system, but you don't want to be auditing a contract that's not in scope. It can lead to issues in the contract that are in scope, but you want to be careful to not spend too much time, auditing maybe a contract that's not in scope, because that's just a bit of a waste of your time. Another huge thing is known issues. I think for this contest, there was, maybe I posted about it, like 25, 30 issues that were submitted for, unsafe ERC20 transfers. And that was actually a known issue that was put out by the Cypher team. So it's a bit of a waste of your time and also the judge's time to submit known issues. And if you're trying to get practice of like how to write issues, then I guess that's okay. But I'd recommend reading those before, so you're not wasting your time. And when I first started, I did that too. But I think my first two contests, I submitted a bunch of known issues, and I was pissed because I didn't get any payouts, only to find out that those were kind of in the description of known issues. So I would totally recommend doing a deep dive in those before, and understanding what the known issues are before you start in any protocols, especially for C4. There's like bot races now. The bots catch a lot of the low level stuff, so you really want to review those. And so yeah, I would
Sometimes the
go
known
ahead.
issues list is like so big, and I also think like what happens when a problem, a certain vulnerability you found somehow relates to a known issue, but it's not it.
Yeah, and that's it's funny you say that, because that was another thing that I was writing content on. It's important for you to know the known issues, because sometimes you can combine those to find that critical, right? Or to find that unique, that solo high, right? I don't, just as an example, like it's a known issue that fee on transfer tokens don't work. And then you see, I don't know, maybe there's a known issue for precision loss. I'm just saying random things here. This is hypothetical. And you figure out a way where both of those things can allow the user to take out a bigger loan with less collateral. And now because you knew those known issues, and because you read them and you studied them, you've found something that is actually unique, that is going to give you a very high payout. And because it's solos, as we know, give higher. So it's also just important to keep those in the back of your head when you're kind of combing through the code base, because you already know that they exist. So I find that to be helpful as well. Yeah, and like I said, my process is very, very unorthodox. I don't really do line by line. What I do is, after I kind of do a skim through the docs, I'll do a skim through the code. And as most auditors do, I'll do my audit tags, and I'll add, like this looks weird, or I don't understand why they did this. And what I find is super useful, where the docs come in handy, is once I've done maybe one or two skims through the code, I'll start to see things that just don't make sense to me. Like specifically in this, when I started this, I thought that each pool, so this is a contract where basically you create a pool, and people could then borrow those tokens, and you set like an interest rate, you set different parameters, and people can then use that pool to borrow tokens. They deposit collateral, borrow tokens. I thought each individual pool was its own contract. And so when I saw that pool right here, wherever it was, I was like, wait, why is it like this? Shouldn't it be creating a new contract, or shouldn't this be a factory? And so then I went back to the docs and read the doc specific to, the lending contract. And I was like, oh, okay, I understand how it works now. It's not individual pools or individual contracts that are holding the tokens. It's one contract that's holding all the tokens, and they're keeping track of the token balances. So that's how I use the doc, while I also read the code, is more of this reference. Like I bounce back to the doc in order for me to understand things that seem extremely confusing while I'm reading the code. Because for me, it's just really helpful. I've tried to do the approach that everyone else does, which is understand it at a high level and then dive into it. But I get kind of bored. Like I get a little bored just reading docs. I get a little bored just trying to understand at a high level. And for me, because I am a developer, I just feel like reading the docs doesn't give me a full understanding of the system
Can we
as much as it may for some other people.
can we talk a
Yeah.
little bit about this, about being bored? Because several times I said here that it's much better to make, let's say, 150K as a developer than making 250K as an auditor, because it's such a consuming job, to go over code, sit over it, and really try to think like an attacker. Can we talk a little bit about how you make the process a little bit fresher every time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think as a developer, one of the things that I enjoy, and I'm probably going to get, a bunch of crap for this on Twitter, but I actually enjoy writing POCs, especially in Foundry, because I like writing Solidity. And so that process for me is actually enjoyable. I find an issue, or I get a lead, and I'm like, okay, now I really want to write the POC, because I feel like it's such a huge dopamine hit when you're actually able to prove an attack, and you write the POC and it works and it passes. Like for me, that's like one of the best highs, is when that actually passes. So that's something that keeps me
Nice.
extremely interested. Um, but I totally get how people could get bored in auditing. Sometimes it feels like one long code review, one long PR review. And I know when I was a dev, that was one of my least favorite things to do, was to to do PR reviews. So, creating sometimes and writing code is the fun part. But so I totally hear why you would say that. Do you think a lot of auditors feel that way? You think they feel like the development process is a bit more fun than the actual auditing process,
So
from what you've heard?
yeah, I get a 50-50, but the reality is that we don't have so many jobs today. So a lot of the developers just became auditors so they can run on C4 and get better at Solidity.
Right.
Um, but only when we see consistency, like coming from news, sorry, not sorry. There's a few guys, they're very consistent, and then I can really be sure that you're someone that actually enjoys and know how to do that process.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say it gets better. It gets better the more you do it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like playing. Let's say you're picking up the guitar. You're trying to play. Learn. The first 6 months, it's going to be difficult, and you're going to think to yourself every day, like, why do I want to learn this thing? This sucks. And then you kind of start to learn a few songs, and you start to learn how to play a few chords, and you're like, oh, this is fun. And then it gets it gets significantly easier than that. And then upskilling from there is actually fun. Like you want to learn how to play that really
Nice.
complicated
Very
song or
nice
that guitar
analogy.
solo. And so I see this very similar. It's like your first 6 months, you're going to struggle. You're going to bang on the computer. You're going to hate this. You're going to say, I don't want to do this. I want to go back. But then you get to a point to where you start to just naturally see issues or feel issues out more. And that gets exciting. Like I get excited when I open a new code base now, especially the deep DeFi code base, and look through it, because just through my first skim, I'm already like, ooh, I've seen this before. I see how this could break. I see how this could break. And that excites me. But when I was first starting and I was just doing gas optimizations, like whatever, plus I is cheaper than I plus or stuff like that, it was really hard for me to feel motivated and feel engaged. And I've actually worked with a lot of auditors, a lot of people when I started, who either came from Consensus with me or people that I met in the space through OpenSense, a couple of people I met through OpenSense, and they were like, yeah, let's do this. We want to do it. And then they kind of hit that roadblock, or they hit that moment of difficulty, and they're like, this is too hard for me. I'm going to give up. And a lot of these people are way smarter than me, way better devs than me. But what they didn't have was the persistence. And that is what ended up becoming the biggest blocker to their success.
Nice.
Because I think like once you get over that hump, it's really, instead of going uphill, you're not going uphill anymore. Now you're just going downhill, and finding issues is just easy. And, I speak to some devs, some friends that I have at Diligence, and they, at Consensus Diligence, and they tell me all the time that they can look at any code base, and within 5 minutes they know, if it's gonna be a mess, and if they're gonna find a ton of criticals, or if it's a really well written code base.
Nice.
And I think once you get to that level of expertise, it becomes fun just naturally, So
Thank you so much, brother.
yeah, of course. Great question. I think that's a great question. And it is true, because the developing process is a bit more, it takes more creativity, so it's a bit more fun. But I will say that also, if you're having fun as a developer writing Solidity, then you're probably not writing super secure Solidity code. You're
It's a stumble with Solidity developers, right? We have auditors. We don't do safe code. They do it. We just deliver the code and then they fix it. And that's something that is massively wrong with the Web3 world. Like there's this separation between developers and auditors. And it's really strange because developers should know how to write proper code. Like in the Web2
yes.
world, usually you're thinking on safety all the time, even as a backend developer. You're not a pen tester, but your code should be, updated, whatever. And in Web3, we have this separation of concerns, which I think is slowly dying, but still there.
Yeah, no, that you said it, you hit the nail like on the head. You said it perfectly. It's, when I worked in Web 2, there was this concept of shift left, like shift security left, right? Like start security should start at the beginning of the development cycle and not wait till the end, for us to do bounties and whatever once the code is already built, because that's extremely expensive. And yet that's the model that we have in Web3 is write your code and then we'll go and do a bounty, or we'll go do an audit. And I mean, it's great for us as auditors because whatever, we're getting paid for that. But I really think we need to start, if we want to make Web3 just safer in general, we really need to adopt this concept of shift left, and security should start at the beginning of the process. And through a lot of the conversations that I've had with developers or hiring managers and product managers, I know that it's starting to become more common for a senior Solidity developer to be defined as a Solidity developer that also takes security. Security is a priority to them. And so even if your goal is just to be a developer, you don't care about auditing, eventually, if you want to make that, that next level of money, or if you want to become a senior Solidity or like a lead Solidity developer, you're gonna have to become one who thinks of security first and has a security first mindset. So as much as you try to separate it, eventually you're gonna hit a point where you have to learn this, so you really can't get away from it. But yeah, Yeah, I was gonna. I don't know if you have any questions, or I could just kind of, we can maybe look at. Yeah. Um. So from this point, I'll start to understand. I think kind of some of the systems, and I'm the type of person where I like to look for the big, what can I say, like the functions or the places in the code that could have some of the biggest vulnerabilities. So stuff like this, right? We're adding to a pool, we're removing from a pool. I see that we're updating balances. I see that, there's transfers happening. I may even go in the code and look for a transfer from and see where all the transfer froms exist, or where all the, if there's a dot call somewhere, there's none in this code, because that's where the movement of funds are happening. So obviously it's places where a lot of attack vectors could exist, or where hackers may want to manipulate the system in some way to benefit. So I would definitely put notes in some of these places. Again, like and I don't know how PC we're trying to be on this call, if it's PG, if I can curse or not. But I know that when I write my audits, I write stuff like, what is going on here? That's kind of how I write my comments. just to just just to kind of keep it fun as well too. Just to, for those very personal, and it's very it's in my, and no one's gonna look at it besides me anyway, but it's just add a little bit of fun to it, which I know devs do a lot too. When they're like console logging stuff, they'll be like console log, what the hell is this, or something. So yeah, exactly. Um, and so from that, I kind of made notes on places in the system where I, think things go wrong. And so I would probably hop back to the docs if I need to deeply understand it. And if I have a good grasp of it, the next thing that I really would do, like if let's say this remove pool function, I would start looking at the tests and to see if these functions were tested, were they fully tested? One thing that I noticed a lot is people test for happy paths in Web3, but they don't test for unhappy paths. They don't test to make sure that a function reverts if certain conditions aren't met, or test to see if you, like, invariant tests as well. Like these have fuzzing tests, but I didn't really see invariant tests in here. So you really want to make sure that every function is fully tested. And what I mean by that is it does what it's supposed to do, but it also reverts if it does something that it's not supposed to do. And if it doesn't, for any reason, then at that point, I'm like, okay, we can take a second, third, fourth look at this function or this area of the code, because we already know that the devs, didn't test for this. So I'm going to try to break it myself. And I'll either go ahead and, maybe write a test for that unhappy path, or I'll try to, manipulate a test that's already written, add some crazy number, or I'll add something or I'll just write my own test to test for some other, test case that I'm interested in seeing how the code would react. So that will already, between those 3 or 4 things that I mentioned, will start to give you a bunch of leads. And my process really, which I think a lot more auditors should do, is whenever you find any type of lead, any type of thing that looks funky, is just start writing it down. Like start writing anything down that you think, this is a medium fee on transfer, whatever the thing is, or this is a high. Even if you're not fully sure, if it's just maybe, I would write it down, because we get so caught up in these code bases and we get so lost in these code bases that it's super easy to say, ooh, this looks weird. And then, I don't know, you get a phone call and you get distracted, and then you go back to the code base and you're like, wait, what was I looking at? And you completely forget. And that could be the difference between you finding a medium or a high. and not finding it because you just forgot to write something down. And another thing too that I do a lot is my comments. Sometimes I'll write something like audit, take a second look at this. And then I'll come back to it the next day and I'll take a second look at it and I'm like, what did I mean by that? I don't understand what I meant by take a second look at this. So I think anytime that you write any type of comments for yourself, make them extremely clear. Pretend like you're auditing on a team and somebody else has to look at that comment and know exactly what that lead was based on that comment. Even if you're auditing alone, because I think it's the best way for you not to miss out on anything, forget anything, or potentially, skip over something that could have been a huge lead and now, you woke up the next day and you forgot about it. Yeah, I don't know if you have any questions so far. I'll take a pause here because I know I'm talking a lot, but cool. One thing too that I've noticed is helpful, especially with the I kind of caught this on the Code Hawks audits, is I don't think people utilize the Discord channels as much as they should. So you could find a lot of different issues. You could find a lot of different leads by just kind of reading through these and seeing interesting questions that other people ask and also asking the devs questions. I don't think this is utilized enough. People, you can ask the devs all different types of questions. You can see what questions other people are asking, and you can find out a lot of information that may not be in the docs, may not be in the README, by just reading through the channels. And these
Nice.
channels are here to help you. These channels are here for this reason. There's usually a dev or two, and I don't think it's utilized enough. And as you can see, even this, like I was searching known issues, like there's so many things in here that you can find out that isn't going to be as obvious in the code base or in the README. So I find that is kind of like a secret sauce, a secret weapon. Alpha, exactly. It's alpha that is not being utilized enough by auditors and some of the folks. And like I said, those devs, they want you to ask them questions. They want you to ask them some of the really complex or just ask them whatever you need. And if you don't want to obviously put a lead in a public channel, you can always just ping them and say, hey, I added you, I have a question for you, and then ask them privately in a DM any type of questions that you may have. And you'll start to find that what they intended to do is not what the code actually does, which is another thing that I want to talk about as well. I think a project's intention is super important because you could read code, you can read this code, let's say, and say, okay, this works the way it's supposed to, where checks and effects, all the stuff, everything looks good. But maybe the dev, for whatever reason, didn't mean to set this to 0. The intention was to set this to 1. And yet in here, they set this to 0. If you don't read the docs or you don't understand what the code is meant to do before you look through it, this will just look fine to you. You're looking through this, you're like, yeah, this looks okay. But actually, they're meant to set this to 1. And I'm just using this as a hypothetical. There's no reason why they would actually do that, but using this as a hypothetical. That would be a medium or potentially a high vulnerability issue because the devs intended to do one thing, but actually in the code they did something else. But if you're just reading the code without knowing the intentions, you're going to miss over that because that just looks like safe code. It looks like everything's okay. It looks bug free. So I think, I found a vulnerability once in a private audit where it was for a DAO, and essentially there was a function to execute the proposals on the DAO as soon as a bunch of other requirements were hit, and anybody could call this. So it was set up for bots basically to call execute proposal. First person to call it receives a reward. However, even if the transfer of the reward failed, the project wanted those proposals to still be executed. So it, something like, calling .call, we do like bool success, .call, you send to the whoever, and then down here you do require success, and you have some, you return some, something like that. And in the code, the devs put this require. So if this failed, essentially the whole function would revert and the money wouldn't get sent. But this actually wasn't part of the intention. The devs wanted this to be removed. And so I mentioned that. I was like, hey, it says in your docs that you want this proposal to be executed, and even if the transfer reverts, but it seems like the dev that developed this put a require statement in, and I put that in as a high vulnerability. And obviously it was a private audit, so there was no they accepted it and they acknowledged it and they changed it. But I think that, to me, was the first time that it showed the importance of understanding a system at a high level and what the devs intended to do. Because not only can you find these critical vulnerabilities by manipulating the system, but you also can see if something is written in the code that would normally look safe to an average auditor, that isn't what the devs intended for it to be. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but that was kind of. You mean like a fix? Yeah, exactly. And so they intended for the require not to be there with the way that they wanted the system to work, essentially. But I guess whoever developed it, just out of pure habit, when you're doing some type of transfer, you want to verify that transfer went through. If not, you want to revert. And so out of habit, I guess the developer put it in there. And so, yeah. Um, what if we didn't discuss this with the developer? So in this specific case, I knew that this wasn't the intention because of it was written in the docs. So one of the requirements in the docs was that the executing proposals would not is not dependent on the transfer being successful. Like, even if the transfer fails, you should be able to execute the proposals. However, this is kind of the benefit of creating that bridge that I was talking about in Discord with the developers, because you can then ask them, hey, was this your intention to put this here? Because I see in the doc that you wanted the proposals to execute regardless of if the transfer went through or not. And yet here I see a require statement. And in that moment, I'm sure the dev would then confirm, like, oh yeah, we did. That's not, we want it. The docs are what we want the system to do. So if there's a require statement in there, please submit it and submit a fix, and we'll remediate it. So I think one of the things, especially that I noticed in private audits, that is super helpful is having that communication channel with developers. And I always ask for that before I do a private audit. It's just a requirement of mine. I'm like, doesn't matter if it's Slack, Telegram, Discord, I need a channel with at least one, if not two of your developers where I can ask them questions and be in constant contact with them. Because if not, it's gonna affect the findings. It'll affect what bugs I find, because I won't know what they intended to do, or I won't know. Devs sometimes they name functions or variables crazy things that make no sense, and there's so many so many reasons for you to want to build this connection or this communication channel with your clients. And on top of that, I think one of the things that I learned from private audits is not just being a good auditor, but being somebody who's informative, being somebody who provides like top quality service, being somebody who is always willing to help, that will lead to repeat clients. That will lead to people wanting to come back and work with you. That will lead to people, recommending you to work with other people. That's just a good business strategy in general. Do you think, like some of the best businesses, they just treat their customers really well. And that goes the same for what we're doing. If you want to build out a private auditing independent business, but all you want to do is just find bugs. I don't know how successful I think you'll be, because part of it is making sure that the client is happy and that you provide a top quality service for them. So I hope, Max, that answers your question. Yeah. And I mean, I've run into that, and we have obviously great developers in our industry who are super helpful, and then we have some people who could be a little arrogant or have big egos. But my thing is, at the end of the day, I'm like, hey, you hired me, so help me help you, And I'm gonna ask dumb questions at first, because you wrote this code base that's 2,000 lines of code, and I don't know what's going on. So the more you help me, I promise you, the more stuff I will find. And so, yeah, I'm going to ask what may seem to you to be dumb questions, but you're also going to put this code out, and it's going to be open source, and it's going to be verified on Etherscan. And, what may seem like a dumb question to you is probably a question that every other dev that's either going to fork your code or build on top of your code is going to have. And what we've seen also in Web3 is composability is huge, right? Like some of the biggest protocols, they're worth billions of dollars because people can easily fork those protocols and build on top of them. So if you're putting out a protocol there, and this is my opinion, but if you're putting out a protocol there that has very low readability of the code, I don't know how many people are going to want to fork your protocol and build on top of it. And so that could be detrimental to the success of your company. So it's really, really good when you're working with an auditor and they're asking what may seem to be dumb questions. If I was the dev, I would take that as like, man, if they're asking these questions that should be obvious, then something that I wrote is not clear enough. The code that I wrote is not clear enough.
That's really like maybe not so well done, and because we also had recently a lot of cases where developers were criticizing the code, auditors were criticizing the code, and it comes again to that point, like the separation of concerns. Like, what happens when you find a code that's like, let's say, really badly written?
Yeah. There's a lot of different opinions on this. I've seen some people on Twitter say these people shouldn't even launch. And, like I think there was a code base recently that had, I don't know, like 200 vulnerabilities found or something like that. And it's, a lot of the chat on Twitter was, they should probably just scrap the thing and build it out again, I think that in those cases, I think you hit a certain. This is just my belief, but I do think you hit a certain point where you should consider redesigning and rebuilding the whole system. If there's 30 critical vulnerabilities found, unless it's like a GMX that is whatever, however many lines of code, 30 lines of code, 30,000 lines of code, then obviously there's going to be tons of vulnerabilities. But if you're releasing a protocol that's 500 lines of code and I was able to find 20 to 30 vulnerabilities, you should probably reconsider writing it or doing a different implementation, or taking a lot of the notes that I gave you and maybe rewriting it with security in mind. And I know Spearbit does this. I know Spearbit offers security consultation before implementation, which I don't know what they call it, but they should probably call it that if they have some other name for it, because that rhymes. But essentially they tell you, they guide you on how to build architecture, how to architecture your code and how to design your code so that it could be secure from the beginning, depending on your system. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year or two, we start to see auditors get hired at the beginning of the process so that they can kind of be with the development team and say, hey, I actually wouldn't do that because, you know, whoever Compound tried to implement that same thing and it got, and I don't know, I'm just using Compound as an example, but so yeah, you know, that's kind of my answer to that. There, you hit a
Awesome.
certain point where it may be worth it for you to just reconsider.
Something that I also wanted to touch upon was on your Twitter marketing tips because you're really good at that, and I can see you raising fast on Twitter too. So, can you give us some alpha on how to advertise yourself as a private auditor?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll start with the benefits. So it's hard when you're starting off on Twitter to see the value. Like, why do I want to tweet? Why should I do threads? Like, it doesn't. But what I will say is what we've seen from the top auditors in space, Pajoff, Bytes 32, a lot of these like big names, they really built out their business through Twitter, and that's where tons of their work comes from. And you're not going to hit those 50K months that Pajoff talks about all the time unless you're building out your business. You can do content to make money, sure, but if you really want to hit those big numbers, it's going to be through private audits. And a lot of that work comes from conferences and Twitter. I get a lot of leads for private audits through Twitter. And I think what I did was when I first was starting off, I casted a really wide net. So I didn't limit myself to talking about one specific topic. I talked about gas optimizations. I talked about different issues. I had motivational tweets. I had all different types of tweets. And I took a very data-driven approach. I then, after a couple months of tweeting a bunch of different topics and a bunch of random things related to security, I started to see what was hitting and what wasn't, what was going the furthest, what was getting the most engagement, what was leading to the most conversions. And from there, I doubled down on those things specifically. And that started to then have this exponential growth, because the thing about Twitter is the bigger you get, the easier it is for you to grow, because the more people you have retweeting your stuff. There's a couple tips that I have, a little bit of alpha that I'll give away. One thing is there's a couple of these like Twitter marketers on YouTube. JK Molina is a really big one. I actually got that one from Pajoff. Pajoff recommended him. And they have, I would watch some of his videos on YouTube. He explains how to set up your bio, how to set up your pin tweet, how to set up everything from like your header to your picture on Twitter, in order to get more conversions. So more conversions are people who go to your profile and then actually end up becoming followers. So I would follow these guys. But the things that I learned do the best. People love threads, especially informational threads. Threads do really well. People love lists. So here's 3 top things you should do as a new smart contract auditor. Here's the top 3 things you should do to make $1,000 this month as an auditor. People love lists like that. My tweets that do the most are anything that has a dollar amount in it. So if I'm like, hey, I made $5,000 last month doing private audits, those are the ones that get the most engagement. And also anything with the word smart contract auditor, smart contract security. So there is a bit of curating. I do a mix of these very low level 101 tweets, and I use that to kind of get more followers, get more reach. And then I have more technical tweets like gas optimizations or going through findings that I found in order to keep people interested and keep people and retain listeners. So it's kind of a method of what can I do in order to make sure that my tweets go far, but also when somebody comes to my page, why are they going to follow me? What am I giving them in order to follow for them to follow me? And it's all about creating value for your followers and for your listeners. Like, you want to provide value for them. You don't want to just keep, writing lists constantly, because that gets boring. The lists will get the people to follow to come to your page, but the more in-depth kind of content is what keeps them there. And so I think that is extremely valuable. And I think really, like I said, taking a data-driven approach. But the biggest thing with Twitter is just consistency. If you consistently tweet, and I think Owen said this as well, he was like, you don't know what to tweet about. He was like, do 3 Twitter threads or 5 Twitter threads a week on different protocols, and do it every week for 2 months. And I promise you'll start to see a change, in your amount of followers. So that's really the biggest thing, is just consistency. And I know that I follow people who tweet on a consistent basis. I don't follow people who tweet once a month. So it kind of works the same. And always in your bio or somewhere in your pinned tweet, tell people what you're selling. Because, the whole point, at least for me, I love more followers. That's great. But I want those followers to also lead to some type of work for me or value for me. Not only am I providing, free value for my followers, but I want that to turn into something. So even in my bio, I say, hey, DM for private audits, or DM for work, or you put it in a pinned tweet. So I really think it comes down to those things. Is knowing how to tweet is important. And there's a ton of people online who could tell you better how to do that. Like I said, just go on YouTube and search Twitter Marketing 101. But really, the consistency is the biggest piece, like being very consistent. And I found that in my first couple months, I wasn't consistent. I've been more consistent the past 3 months, and my follower count has grown significantly since I've been consistent, and it leads to a lot of work. Like, a lot of the work that I'm doing now is work that I've gotten through DMs and through Twitter. So, yeah, yeah, I mean, you're great at that. You're one of the people who's you've been in the space for a while, and you consistently, like, put out good content. Or the YouTube is another place that is not. People are now starting to put out more videos on YouTube. We obviously see Owen, we see Johnny putting out content, but it's really it's kind of a new frontier. So I would say, for folks who are getting into auditing, trying to build a following, is go for these places, or go for the things as well that other people aren't doing yet. And another thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot is that all again, the big accounts they mentioned as well, is learning in public is one of the best things that you could do. So if you feel like you have nothing to write about, go do an audit contest, take notes during that contest, write things down, write all your findings, obviously in an MD file, and then go back and look at those notes after the contest is done. And I promise you'll be able to create at least 3 to 4 tweets from all of that. You just collected so many notes and created so much content for yourself during that process. And so if you feel like, oh, I don't know what I should write about, go do a contest. Like, go participate in a contest and write about everything, that all your struggles, everything that you found interesting, everything that you hated, everything that you loved. And I promise you'll be able to have 5 tweets from that, and people will be able to relate to that. People want to see relatable content as well. All these technical articles and stuff that Spearbit puts out, we love all that, but the other stuff also has value too. Hey, I'm just starting, and here's all the things that I struggled with in my first 3 months of auditing. People want to see that. That's all that is valuable. So
Awesome.
yeah, I don't know if people have any questions. I know we're kind of coming up on time, but I'm open to answering any questions if folks have questions, or if you had any questions. Yeah, I don't.
And I have a question from Nas, which is, while auditing, do you mainly focus on high, mediums, and lows, or you also provide gas reports?
Oh, that's a good question. Depends on the contest or the platform. Obviously, Sherlock only does highs and mediums, as well as Code Arena nowadays. Really only does highs. When I'm doing private audits, I do everything: gas, high, medium, and low. But nowadays, I've actually started building a bot. I forked the analyzer bot. I don't know if folks know the analyzer bot, but it's a bot that was built. I can share it too in the open source Discord after, and I started adding my own code to it, and I'm using that a lot on my private audits because it automatically creates a gas optimization report for me on the majority of very basic low level stuff, like optimizing for loops and all that. And so I still submit that to clients. Clients still find that extremely useful, but nowadays I'm trying to automate that process as much as possible. So I do, like I said before, though, I do find lows extremely important, because there's a lot of times where you can combine those lows and get a medium. So I don't ignore them, but it just, if I'm doing a C4 contest, I'm not really looking at low vulnerabilities that much, because the majority of them have been covered by bots. But there's some things that aren't covered by bots. So if I find it, I'll submit it. Like someone spelled something wrong or something. Like even that, I found one the other day where someone spelled the name of something wrong. So submitted that. But for the most part, bots will find everything nowadays, and I actually started building out my own bot as well to use in private audits, because it just makes that process a lot quicker.
Awesome. Do you think about joining the bot racers?
Yeah, that's why I started. That's why I started building out this bot, is because on the next qualifier, I want to join, and I really want to get heavy into the bot racing, because I think that it's still fairly new. Obviously it's been around a couple months, but there's still a lot of opportunity, and it's still growing, and it's still very experimental. So I think that if folks are thinking, "Hey, I'm a better dev than I am an auditor," consider checking out bot races. And like I said, that analyzer bot starts with a 4. It's like 4 analyzer instead of an A or something like that. It's a great starting point.
I'm gonna share the
And
link
then you could
here.
build on top of it. All right, cool. Yeah, share the link if you got it. That'd be perfect. Yeah.
Awesome, brother. Awesome. I mean, this is it for me. I don't know if you have any points, any closing thoughts.
No, I mean, I see some people with hands. I don't know if anybody else wants to ask a question. I don't know how that works.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know if the
yeah.
hands up.
The hands are me inviting, but I guess they're shy. They don't wanna talk today. It
Okay.
happens. It happens.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I guess the only thing is my DMs are open. Feel free to DM me. No phishing links, please. I worked in security, so I know when it's phishing link. But if you need any help, if you have any questions, if you're, I tend to really not respond too much to people who are like, "What do I need to do to become an auditor?" I think there's enough threads out there that explain that. But if you're stuck on something, if you have a question about something or my process, something that I mentioned, like please reach out. My DMs are open. I've always been the dev that's always trying to help and upskill new people. So, and as we've been doing that in open sense for some time now. So yeah, the DMs are open. Feel free to message me if you need anything.
Thank you so much, brother. That was really insightful, really good, and really good talk. I learned a lot today.
Yeah.
Especially
Yeah.
the way you go through the code. I think that's a very good strategy of not keeping yourself too close to the docs, skimming through it, and then going back. Also the Twitter tips. So thank you so much for everything. And I
Of
guess
course.
talk to you guys later. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. It's been great.
No problem, brother. See ya.